Hello, rock and roll rebels, and welcome to another episode of Ramble On with Rosie. And to quote the bard, a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet, and so would all the songs about roses. And women named Rose and Rosie and Rosalita and Rosemary. And so that's what we're going to be talking about in the spirit of last week's holiday, which some of y'all probably have some roses that are still, decent enough to have on your table or kitchen counter from what you got gifted last week. So hopefully you do. And here's some songs to discuss that are about roses. This is also slightly an autobiographical episode because we will be discussing the impact that some of these songs, because there's a lot of songs about roses, but some of these songs had a big impact on me. So we'll get to that. So to kick it off, because I'm going in order of me getting introduced to these songs. So, starting with Ramblin Rose by Nat King Cole, which is one of the first songs I can remember hearing. It was like that, and Lay Lady Lay by Bob Dylan, and Sooner or Later by the Grassroots, and a couple other songs that I really started to become aware of music to. I think there was a couple Beach Boys songs there that I always associated with a family vacation to California. So, that's like songs that I remember hearing, and Ramblin Rose by Nat King Cole was one of the first, because my family had like the greatest hits of Nat King Cole. My mom and dad are both big Nat King Cole fans, especially my mother. And that song I always, because I got accused of rambling in the sense of taking too long to talk as a kid, so I always liked that. Plus, I guess I've been a sucker for bittersweet songs my whole life, because it's sort of, he's kind of plaintive in the song about the fact that she's rambling around, she's moving, and I moved a lot. So like that was probably Ramblin Rose was probably the first song in my life that ever really like spoke to me, because it seemed like she moved a lot, and it seemed like she wasn't quite feeling like she'd ever be tied down, couldn't commit. Which, I mean, I guess even at 7 years old, I was already questioning how commitment prepared I was. Haven't stopped doing that since either. But so I really loved the song. I mean, because I've lived in over 30 different houses in over 10 different, well, not over 10 different states, but I've lived in 10 different states, some of those multiple times. So I've done a lot of moving. So this whole idea of rambling really spoke to me, even though I was only like 7 or 8. And so Ramblin Rose had a big impact on me, and it's a great song. Nat King Cole is one of the finest singers to, ever sing. Great singer, great jazz pianist. His skills were so top tier that, he's one of the artists that like help break down the racial barriers for performers. Because I think up to him, like I think it was the Sands in Las Vegas, but no one had ever performed, no person of color had ever performed at that, venue until he did, because everybody wanted to see him so badly that their people decided that making a buck was, better than staying bigoted. Everybody wins there, right? I guess. Questionable ethics, but, the end result was good. The barriers started to be broke down, with Nat King Cole and some other artists like Ella Fitzgerald and Count Basie. And artists of that, generation started to break down the racial barriers in their own time, and then, the next generation really, helped with that. So Nat King Cole, very cool dude all around, also had a talented daughter, who I love her cover of Pink Cadillac by Bruce Springsteen, but that's another ramble for another time. So his song Ramblin Rose just always, it like was one of the first songs I really identified with, which I'm going to take a side note here to let y'all know my legal name is not Rose or Rosie or any variation of. My legal name is Austin. My parents were expecting another son and they had a daughter, and then they just decided to go with the name they had planned for the son because I guess they didn't have a backup, or well, according to my mom, they just really liked the name. So I got stuck with the boy's name as a kid. Oh, so fun times. But from an early age, the name Rose was already I was already attached to it from this song. The fact that I named the only stuffed animal or doll I had that kept its name was my white bear named Rosie. And I was 4 when I named that thing. So I've been attached to the name for a very long time. Whenever I contemplated writing under a pen name, because I do write fiction on the side, always was going for some variation of Rose. Took me a while to realize, like, oh, I can actually ask people to call me that instead of Austin. Huh. I can make waves. I can exert myself. This is scary. But anyways, that side note aside, from a very young age, the name was already speaking to me, even if I didn't have the courage to, like, ask people to call me that. I always liked the name. You know, you're a kid, you don't know what the rules are, so you don't know if you can ask people to call you something that's not your legal name, or if that will get you put in jail. Like, is this forgery? But, side note there, and moving on, some of the other songs with roses in them that really appealed to me, because I was a big classical music kid too. I probably listened to classical music more than any other genre from, like, age 7 to, like, 12. Very big on the classical. And Strauss, the Waltz King, who is one of my favorite composers because I love to dance, has a waltz called Roses from the South, which, as somebody from the South, even though he probably meant South Austria, I highly love this song. Really do. I mean, I love to dance. It's a waltz. Waltzes are great. It's about one of the few slow dances I actually enjoy. And Strauss is one of my favorite composers. It's like him, Beethoven, Dvorak, and Tchaikovsky. On the topic of Tchaikovsky, he has some other rose-related classical music, because in Sleeping Beauty, which is probably my favorite piece of classical music, incidentally, they used it for the score for the 59 cartoon, Disney cartoon. The music in that cartoon is from the Sleeping Beauty ballet by Tchaikovsky, because you can't improve on the best, so they just went with it and adapted it to the cartoon, which is great and awesome, and I love it. But even in the Sleeping Beauty, there's like a dance part of the ballet that's the Rose Adagio, and so I was always partial to Sleeping Beauty because I love Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky is my single favorite classical composer here. The dude has a piece of music with cannons in it. You can't get any cooler than that. Music with cannons. Like, that trumps AC/DC's Hell's Bells with the giant bell. Like, it's got a freaking cannon. I am very excited about the cannons, the 1812 Overture. Sleeping Beauty has no cannons, but it's a really, really good piece of music. Listen to the full ballet, not the stupid shortened little excerpts. I hate listening to excerpts. I'm like, I want to hear the whole piece of music. Thank you very much. Side note there. So, all 3 LPs of the Sleeping Beauty ballet, if you can get a hold of them. And there's roses in that too. Plus, roses are fairly prominent in the Sleeping Beauty cartoon, which uses the music. And my Sleeping Beauty being my favorite princess, her alias is Briar Rose. Also, not anything to do with classical music, but also on the Disney topic, Beauty and the Beast, which has a great soundtrack. Alan Menken was a master, I think he's still alive, is a master of, writing really good scores and words and just everything. All the best Disney soundtracks, almost, were done by Alan Menken, especially of the 90s cartoons. And roses feature really prominent in Beauty and the Beast. Like, the whole plot is about a rose. So, like, that was my first favorite princess until I got to see Sleeping Beauty. So, really attached to roses and the music in those Disney cartoons that are about roses. But moving on from childhood to, like, early adolescence. So, like, I'm coming out of the classical phase a little bit. I'm starting to explore, really get into, like, the 60s music, because that's what my mom listens to. And my dad will sometimes listen to oldies radio at that time. He was starting to get into jazz at this point. So this is where me and my father's musical paths began to diverge, and he was the bigger of the 2 influences on my taste in music. But there are some really nice pop songs about roses, or rather women named Rose. You've got Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes, which is making a comeback. I'm surprised. Like, it's a rather obscure song, but it seems to be making a comeback, and it, like, is, relevant again, and people are doing covers of it, and I'm like, huh, who knew? Especially because at this time, in my early teens and late childhood, I was planning on writing a novel that was set on the seacoast of England, because I had a big maritime obsession at this time. Thank you, Pirates of the Caribbean and the Horatio Hornblower miniseries by A&E. But I was obsessed with this. I was going to write this, novel about this heroine on the coast of England, and, her joins the Navy or her husband's in the Navy or whatever. The Navy was involved. And I was going to make my pen name, because I've never liked my actual name, Rosemary Shore, until my brother told me that that sounded like a grandma name, and I got sad and sort of gave up the name change thing there for a while. But loved, and it was because, pretty much 80% because love grows where my Rosemary goes. That's where Rosemary came from, that, and there were famous figures in history with both the name Rose and Mary, and I wanted to put them together. But Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes is a beautiful song. I love it. It was like everything that I wanted for my life. I wanted to be that girl. That's sort of who I saw myself as capable of being, because I'm a pretty sunny, outgoing, upbeat person. So I was like, yeah, I'll be that girl. Yeah, reality happened. But I still tried to be that girl in spite of it all. And then also other Rose songs was Cracklin' Rosie by Neil Diamond, that was sort of like the ideal of romance that I had, was just something, simple and slightly adventurous, but like in a everyday, ordinary kind of way. It was sort of like I sort of put Cracklin' Rosie and Forever in Blue Jeans by Neil Diamond together as one song in my head. Like that was sort of the complete picture of, the daydreams about whoever I had a crush on at the time or whatever it was. Because, I mean, let's face it, I'm like 13 at this point. The mind is pretty much taken up with like reading and whoever I have a crush on. So that was like my crush song, was, Cracklin' Rosie, and that was how I thought, life would be when I grew up and, was pretty and the boys would start to notice me, and this would be the life that I would have. So I was trying to be Rosemary and Rosemary Goes, and I was hoping one day I'd get the Cracklin' Rosie side of things. Also, when I was really annoyed with my parents, I was Rosalita from Bruce Springsteen's song, because I wanted somebody to liberate and confiscate me because I wasn't happy. It was like the teenage angst side of me was like, can somebody just drive through the swamps of Jersey, which I'm not even exactly sure where that's at in the country, but somebody drive through the swamps of Jersey and liberate and confiscate me because I don't like my life. Typical 14-year-old thoughts. So, like, those three, that was like my trifecta of like getting me through my early teens, was Cracklin' Rosie and Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes and Rosalita. And yet somehow it wasn't hooking up that I should, potentially was capable of asking people to call me by a different name. But moving on from that, we get to college. And when I started college, which I started college at 17, If I Die Young by the band Perry was like every girl's favorite song. And I'm not a big country music person. And honestly, I didn't even like the song that much. I just had to listen to it so much. And I was like, oh, buried in a bed of roses in a river at dawn. I was like, it sounds so tragically romantic. It sounds like Ophelia from Hamlet or something. It sounds like that's how you'd bury Ophelia. But, that sort of appealed to that bittersweet, melancholic side that I've had going all the way back to Ramblin Rose by Nat King Cole, where it's like, oh, there's kind of a sadness in this song. And I was like, I love water and I love roses. So If I Die Young was like a jam, even though I didn't really like the song. I sort of reluctantly liked the song because I liked some of the things it was singing about. And then also, not that I was not familiar with it before then, but the Yellow Rose of Texas, I mean, I have grown up in Texas. I wasn't born in this state, but I've lived here probably half my life collectively out of those other 9 states that I've lived in plus Texas. So I always liked it. It's a fun song, especially it draws on, like, I love old folk songs. Like, I don't mean 60s folk, not that I don't like 60s folk, but I'm not talking Simon and Garfunkel. I'm talking, like, traditional songs that nobody even knows who wrote them from, like, the 19th century or older. So songs like Barbara Allen and, a lot of the old Irish folk songs, especially the ones where they're bitching about wanting to kill all the English. They're great songs. They slap. They're such good songs, even if it's just like, screw the English is basically the theme of every single one of these songs. And so it's, I love, and The Yellow Rose of Texas is a song that I think was around the time of the Civil War, because there's various versions of it, but one of the versions was you can sing of Beauregard and the gallant Lee, but no, or something about and Bobby Lee, but the gallant hood of Texas, he played hell in Tennessee. So it's about the Civil War. So like it's been around for a while. And then also the folklore behind who the Yellow Rose was is really cool because apparently, according to the legend, um, which is decently believable, like it's not totally made up. It's one of those. It's like slightly more relevant than Robin Hood or King Arthur. Like there's a little bit more historical evidence for it. But um, there was this gal who was like had been taken into Santa Anna's camp, to sort of be his concubine, mistress, whatever you want to call that kind of woman, and she sort of, because Sam Houston was about to attack, and kind of distracted Santa Anna, so he literally got caught with his pants down and wasn't ready for battle, and, which gave another advantage to the already very pissed off Texan army, because this would be where we're screaming, "Remember the Alamo" at Santa Anna and his army, trying to avenge the fallen Texans and Texicans that were at the Alamo and held it off for the sole purpose of giving Sam Houston an advantage in the war for, against Santa Anna's army. So, that being the cool thing, I like the history of it, this sort of like girl power in its own way. Sneaky, but still effective. And, it's a fun song, and there's various versions of it, which is fun to look them up and listen to how the lyrics have changed over the years. Because like I said, it's been around since the Civil War, if not before. And then, also in college, that's where I first heard Every Rose Has Its Thorns by Poison, and that's simply because I worked at Walmart and it got played a lot, to the point that I sort of, I liked it, but I had to stop listening to it outside of work for a while, because I was gonna stop liking it if I listened to it at home and at work too much. I was like, this song has a limited shelf life. We need to rotate it out so we don't hate it. Working at a store that plays the same playlist over and over will make you hate songs. Like, I don't like Glory Days by Bruce Springsteen, because I had to hear it too much at Walmart. So, duly noted, if you run a business, change up your playlist so your employees don't hate you and or the music that you play by the time you're done. But, that one, and then also after I moved from Georgia back to Texas, was working at a plant store, and the lady's ringtone was, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. So I got introduced to that song as well. Really enjoyed it, even though I'm not a big country person, but I was like, it had roses in it, so I'm gonna love the song. Still haven't taken around to calling myself Rosie yet. That comes with the next phase of personal development, because here's my conclusion as we take a break here. So we're transitioning from Austin to Rosie, not in a orientation sense, just in a personal growth sense of getting comfortable in your own skin like you do when you're growing up. And I was sort of thinking about this. I was like, there's two different, very distinct categories of Daddy's little girl. There is Daddy's little girl who gets everything she wants and is the princess and is spoiled and is very much like, not even spoiled in a bad way, but is allowed, indulged by her father. Then there's the other category of Daddy's girl, which is what I fall into, where my dad was like, I'm gonna make a man out of you. Not literally, but as in, I expect you to be doing everything that a guy could do reasonably, competently. Give or take, I know that you can't lift as many heavy things as a guy can, but I'm still not gonna, if no one else is around to ask to haul the other end of this giant lazy boy couch, you're gonna have to help. So that was where I was. So, that being me, I had the tomboy bravado attitude. I've mentioned it in other episodes where I wasn't really comfortable acting feminine. I thought that was lame and weak and dumb. Because, why do that when you can play football and throw around bags of sack concrete, the cement mix. That's where my pride was. So I was like, lame girl stuff like dolls, ew. It was not that there's anything wrong with being a tomboy, and I still am one, but there is a balance between sort of eschewing who you actually are because you think you're cool when you're something else. Figure out actually who you are and being comfortable with that, which is what happened with some help from rock and roll. So as I'm sort of starting to outgrow that childish attitude of I want to be cool, so I'm going to do these things, and these things are the boyish things that make me cool, my mid-20s, I'm like, okay, now we actually gotta figure out who we are and get comfortable in our own skin, which maybe involves not hiding behind, well, I heard someone call it a masculine shield, and I'm like, huh, that sounds familiar. I've done that. So getting comfortable with your identity. And started out, rock and roll was with me all along. I got into Queen, which has no songs about roses that I know of, unfortunately, but some great songs. And then after that, and I'm doing personal growth as this goes, the next band I got really obsessed with was Led Zeppelin. Who has how many more times with Robert Plant singing "Oh Rosie, oh girl," and I'm like, oh, okay. So I liked that, and I also was starting to get back into older music that I hadn't listened to in a while, like so back into Bruce Springsteen. And I was like, yes, I remember how much I loved this song. I loved Rosalita. It's like my song. Like, the same way you feel like if you have songs that have your name in them, whether your name's Jenny and people want your number, or your name's Stacy and you're a hot mom, or your name's Bobby McGee, and you're like, hey, yeah, Janis Joplin's singing a song about me. Or even if you don't have a song with your name at the state, like if there's a song about your state, you kind of feel attached to it, possibly. I had felt that way about all these songs about women, named Roses, or even songs with roses in them. And then after, some really deep prayer, as I'm trying to sort out with my identity, and I'm like, well, I mean, as a person of faith over here, I trust that the person who made me is the only one who knows who I'm actually supposed to be, because I got no clues, and I'm tired of asking mom and dad, because that just makes life messy, because they don't, they know that they shouldn't be telling me who I am at this age. So, sorting through, identity with prayer and stuff, and it's like, oh, this is who I am. And I've always liked this song. A fantasy novel. I read Aragon. But this is my true name. Like, I've always loved this. This has always been the name I was meant to have, which isn't totally out of the ordinary. I mean, there are various characters in the Bible who have a name change when they have a big identity shift, life crisis sort of moment in their narrative, in the scriptures. So it's like, this isn't out of the ordinary. It's weird telling somebody else about it, but I am comfortable with where I'm coming from. And, it was very much because, like, the probably biggest influences that was Bruce Springsteen's Rosalita, because that sort of tied me back to the person I was when I was 12, 13, 14, before I got, jaded by life. And then, Rosie by Jackson Browne, because that was sort of the good and the bad of the life that I daydream of having, where, I'm back in the 70s going to concerts, flirting with rock stars, all the things. I'm like, yeah, that's not all the glamour that I would like it to be, but I still might try if they ever invent time travel. What can I say? I love Led Zeppelin a lot, and Bad Company, and Bruce Springsteen, and all those other bands that I would love to go see and potentially flirt with members of. But that's a side note. And the Ramones. And the Clash. Can't forget my punk side. And Jackson Browne himself, if we're going to be honest. But anyways, moving on from crushes. It sort of was like, oh. And so those two, especially like when I heard Rosie, because I'd never heard it before. It didn't get played on the radio, so I was deep digging through Jackson Browne's discography, listening to all the albums in order all the way through, and I was like, I've never heard this song before. And it's literally about me. Like, it's not, but it is. And I feel like it is. And it's got the name that I always liked. And then that made me examine why I like this. Why I've been attached to songs about women named Rosie and Rose my whole life. And I was like, oh, okay. This makes sense. Finally clicked, God whacked me over the head, however you want to put it. And so I, was like, okay. So I started. I'm not one of those people that makes big deal about it to people who knew me, beforehand. I'm not like, well, you can't call me that anymore, because I don't want to be dramatic. But any new introductions, I started going by Rosie, and my friends who were chill with it, started calling me Rosie. And it is my name. It feels more like my name than when somebody calls me Austin anymore. And so that was just like this whole big personal growth thing, largely, brought about by music. Music is a vehicle for, spiritual enlightenment, I guess you could call it, whatever, revelation, maybe that's the word. which sounds crazy, especially given that people are like, oh, Christians don't like rock and roll. And I'm like, excuse me, have you met me? I care passionately about both of these things. It's just the unfortunate, stereotypes that get attached to things, whether it's the stereotypes that Christians have about rock and roll or the stereotypes that rock and rollers have about Christians, both of which are 90%, false and based on a few negative wackos doing crazy things. So that was, my sort of personal growth through song, which proves that, God can use anything. He used songs for me and, however it works. Obviously, take this with a grain of salt if you're not a person of faith. My faith means a lot to me. I understand not everybody has a sense of faith, and, it's your life, and grow, however you're going to. This isn't me preaching, I promise. And to prove that, I'm going to jump from talking about my deep Christian faith to AC/DC, who has a song called Highway to Hell. Incidentally, I had a boyfriend who was uber Christian who was like, oh, you shouldn't listen to that. And I'm like, I'm not going to hell just because I'm singing about it, okay? It's a place, and it's a bop. I love this song. But in case I ever just, suddenly, I don't know, develop a thyroid issue or like whatever and gain lots of weight, I will still have body positivity because of AC/DC's Whole Lotta Rosie. So AC/DC will come in clutch should I ever, gain excess pounds. Love AC/DC, by the way. They're not a fave, but they wrote some total bangin' tunes, and it's undeniable, whether it's You Shook Me, or, like I mentioned earlier, Hell's Bells. I mean, as cool as cannons are in Tchaikovsky, AC/DC's giant 1,000 or 1-ton bell is pretty cool. I forgot, there was some place that would... Look up the history of the bell that they use, because it was cast at some foundry that had something to... I've mentioned it in an episode before, I think, and I kind of forgot. But anyways, there's a cool history to the bell that they used. But moving on from that to our final song, which it comes from the artist who has been helping me through my, it's not really a depression, but midlife crisis or whatever you want to call it that I've been having, my mental health struggles of the last month or so, which is Joe Strummer, Saint Joe Strummer. He's the best of humanity. In fact, I did a post months ago on my Instagram at Ramble with Rosie where I was talking about like Joe Strummer, because as far as I know, he didn't necessarily have a, faith or religious, views. I don't know of them if he did, what they were, but I do love how I'm like, this man is calling me out by how exemplarily generous he was with his life, like I went on about in my Kindness Calling episode. Joe Strummer was like the best of humanity when he was at his best. Obviously, nobody's perfect. So I was like, I feel called out. I feel convicted that I need to be a better person, because here's Joe Strummer, doing all this. And I'm like, as a Christian, it's, my job to show love to the world. And I'm like, I don't know that Joe Strummer was a Christian, but he did a damn good job of showing love to the world. So I'm like, I feel called out. I need to step up my game. I need to be a better person because Joe was. And Joe has this beautiful song about this lady shooting somebody, called Rose of Erin, which I love because it's, yet again, one of those kind of bittersweet songs. There's like a sad plaintiveness to it, and it's beautiful. Also, as someone who is part Irish and is obsessed with Irish history and Irish folk music, especially learning their history through their folk music, I love it, because for those of you not in the know, Erin is the Gaelic word for Ireland. So the Rose of Erin was literally the Rose of Ireland if you translated Erin out of the Gaelic. So I'm like, yes, Rose and Irish, yes, Joe! So, and not to mention, I love Joe's voice. Doesn't matter whether he's singing, especially during his like mescaleros and later, musical projects outside of the Clash. Doesn't matter whether he's singing or speaking in an interview. His voice is very soothing. Like, it's very calming. Like, listening to Joe Strummer in interviews is just, takes the anxiety levels down. It's great. And he's always very witty and entertaining, as well as very intelligent and well-spoken. So if you have nothing better to do with your time and you're feeling a little upset, guarantee you listening to Joe Strummer in an interview will, like, calm the nerves. So listening to Joe's work lately, including Rosemary, has helped with the struggles. Basically between Joe Strummer and prayer, I have survived the last month. So I will continue surviving and bringing you musical rambles, probably back on, more strictly musical topics in future, but I feel like I should get autobiographical every now and then so y'all know who I'm talking about. I did it with my, Ramblin Rose episode a few, months back, usually, after a season break. I skip a week and then come back in with an autobiography. So this was my musical background and the background of my name and a bit of background about myself and my faith via music, because that is the conduit of my life. That is the river that my boat flows on, is music. And I will continue floating downstream on my canoe and hopefully bringing you and all your friends and anybody who is interested in music with me. And we'll see, to quote Pocahontas, another princess, what's around the river bend, because it'll be more music, but I'll be sharing with it. I know shortly around the river bend in March, I will be discussing an Irish musician and my favorite, Rory Gallagher, who does not get talked about enough, and so I'm going to make up for that by talking about him a lot, like probably every single episode in March, because his birthday was in March, and St. Patrick's Day is in March, and I'm part Irish, and I love Ireland. Of all the countries I have extraction from, I'm just like, I love Ireland. I think it's just the sheer spirit of being willing to never give up after, like, what would it be, like, over 600 years of foreign occupation? Like, they never decided after 250, they're like, you know what, we keep losing our rebellions, I think we'll just quit and, like, submit to British rule. They're like, no, screw you. We will continue fighting until we're all dead. Bye. This is not going over. We're never just gonna submit. Like, so the rebellious spirit of Ireland appeals to me, which is why they're probably the favorite country of all the ones I extract, from, because being American, I'm kind of what my mom likes to refer to as a Heinz 57. So you get a little bit of about every Northern European country, and a little bit of Native American, a little bit of whatever else may be in there, because the family's been living in America for over 300 years. French, Canadian, Dutch, whatever. Lots of stuff. So, that tangent aside, we will be venturing to the Emerald Isle all of March, probably, and probably all of those being about various aspects of Rory Gallagher's career, because he was an awesome, amazing musician, one of my favorite guitarists, and I love him a lot. So we'll be talking about Rory next month. I'm not sure what we'll be talking about next week before March gets here, but stick around, listen to next week's episode, and you'll find out. And until then, be kind to each other and rock on.